Good afternoon from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm. It's 12:34 p.m. on Saturday, the 21st of February 2026. Shabbat Shalom. And it's another hot day, 30 degrees. And I'm late getting going this morning. I feel a bit flat today. I don't know why. I had a lovely day yesterday. I went to have my debrief with my wonderful, worthy psychiatrist. And there was a lot of anxiety because he's moved his clinic to New Farm. So, I had to use, well, it's not that hard. I had to use my GPS, but that's not the hard part. And then I worried about parking and, just worked myself into a bit of an anxious state. But I got there early enough. I allowed an hour. So by the time I got there, I was 40 minutes early. It only took me 20 minutes to drive there. So that was all very good. And so I went and had a look at the second-hand shop. And I wrote about it this morning on Facebook because all these memories came up about a very exclusive shoe shop called Marion's, who they have a store in New Farm somewhere. I saw it on the map when I put in the GPS coordinates for the new clinic I'm going to be coming to once a month. So yes, so what happened was I went to the op shop and I was looking around just quickly because I didn't have a lot of time, 15 minutes or so. And I thought, well, I'll just have a quick look and see if there's anything interesting in there. Sometimes you find some really wonderful things or bargains. It pays to just have a little look-see, you not necessarily buy anything. And I spotted these designer shoes. They had about 3 pairs of them. And I know they would have come from Marion's down the road because they were charging in the second-hand shop. They were like nearly new. They were obviously old stock. Or maybe someone wealthy had donated them. They might not have come from Marion's. But the prices they charged for them, by the gods. They were beautiful snakeskin, very high stilettos, which I knew. I love stilettos. I wore them all my adult life until about only a few years ago I gave up. But I love them so much. But I just tried one on and it was just too high. And I thought, I'll never be able to wear these out. I'll stumble around, look like a silly old fool. And, I have constant weakness and pain in my legs now, and as I wrote in my little story for Facebook, I have a rolling gait like a sailor just newly on shore leave, like I'm been at sea for years, and that kicks in when I'm tired. I have this weird rolling gait. It looks a bit like I'm drunk, but of course I'm not at all drunk, and it's all to do with muscle weakness and probably an adverse effect from 15 years of psych meds. I'm so grateful to my psychiatrist. Just as a little segue, I'm so grateful to him for supporting me 9 years ago when I said, these medications aren't helping my depression and trauma and anxiety issues at all, but are making me sick in other ways, and I want to wean off them. What's called taper off them. And he supported me in that. So yesterday when I said to him, oh well, Brian, I said, I'm still crazy after all these years. I said, how am I doing? And he looked at me with such love and sweetness and compassion, and he said, how are you doing? He said, you're off all your psych meds for the past 9 years. I think you're doing very well, Tanya. Isn't he sweet and supportive? Because actually, I am doing very well, but I still struggle with my level of poverty and my inability to succeed and achieve in almost every vector, including in romantic love partnerships, which is I want to cry. It just seems like an incredibly evil curse cast upon me by some evil demonic spirit. And you know what? All jokes aside, that might actually not be as crazy as it sounds, given, you know, my mother's malevolence towards me most of my life until she died, and the envy and enmity of other women competing for former lovers, the viciousness that went on with that. And it's like, why were they allowed to have love partnerships and I was not? Doesn't actually make sense. Like, I'm a perfectly lovely woman. I mean, I do have my issues. I've got a bit of a fiery temper, and you know, I'm a great aficionado of natural justice and basic human decency, and I can be a bit prudish about certain things, and I very much believe in ethics and free will and human rights, and I'm a bit of an anarchist and a revolutionary at times. But apart from all those things that make people think I'm batshit crazy or weird or non-compliant, I'm actually a lovely person. Anyway, but it was just segueing there about my psychiatrist saying, you're doing well, you're off all your medications, have remained that way for 9 years. It's actually nearly 10 years in June. 10 years. Anyway, so back to the op shop. So I'm looking at these stilettos. They were glamorous. Old me would have bought them in a pink fit, except I looked at the price and I actually audibly went, oh dear God, because it's a second-hand shop. You know, it's meant to be for charity. It's meant to be selling goods at a reasonable price. Do you know what they wanted for those? And they were lovely shoes, don't get me wrong. $295. And I think the second pair were nearly $400. And the other pair weren't even as nice. I was like, are you insane? I stood there and I looked at them and I thought, now I know our world is inverted and insane. But anyway, I had all these flashbacks coming back to me of when I was, oh my goodness, I was still married back in the day. So we're talking prior to, you know, 1st of January 1995. I think it must have been 1990, somewhere between 1992 and 1995, because I realised I was very unhappy in my marriage, and my mother always bought me most of my clothes. I was kept in a kind of a childhood type state. It was really invalidating and dehumanising in a way, probably not meant so negatively, but knowing what I know about how my relationship with my mother devolved, I think it was a kind of a control base. And so she bought my hats, and yes, I used to wear the most exquisite hats, people of Earth. She bought my hats, well, I still do when I wear my top hat that my daughter bought me. She bought my hats, most of my clothing and my shoes, and they all came from second-hand shops, because my mother was passionate about shopping second-hand shops. Some weird reason that makes no sense to me. I'm not overly particularly fond of them, but I just go there occasionally on the off chance that I might see something of interest. But anyway, and that's how we kind of survived. I survived financially. We had our business, which was a good business, but my former husband only gave me $150 housekeeping or pocket money, and out of that $150, $100 each week would go on private day school fees for our little Jewish day school here that they started up in 1992, was it, or 1993? I think they started 1991, and my kids came of age the following year or so. And I wanted them to have a private Jewish education because I was bullied mercilessly all throughout my school career, from the first year of primary actually right up to university level, when I actually had hoped that behaviour would actually cease because I was studying with adults. No, it got only worse, so eventually dropped out of university because of all the systemic bullying and abuse. But anyway, I digress. So with my little bit of extra money that was left over, I would save up. Sad but true, this is how poor I have been all my life, even when, to all intents and purposes, I had a freehold house and a business. I wasn't poor at all. Well, the house wasn't freehold when Michael bought the business, because we mortgaged the house to pay for the business, which was how he managed to screw me out of everything with the divorce. But anyway, but in those days, in between 1992 to 1995, I decided that I needed some fucking self-esteem, and I was going to buy my own shoes and my own clothes on occasion, and not just have all these handouts and sort of given to me in a kind of a supercilious, condescending way by my awful mother, am I right? So I started going to Marion's, which, as I said, is a very exclusive, expensive shoe shop. They had a shop in Stones Corner back in the 90s. And so I would trot down after dropping my little ones off at school, and it was a short drive from Burbank to Stones Corner. And I would look at I'd look at all the discount shops. They had lots of discount clothing shops, and I would sometimes buy myself or the children something there. Something that I bought with my money so I could have some fucking self-esteem, people of Earth. It really was that bad. So anyway, and I would go to Marion's and I would look at and almost drool over all their beautiful French, Italian, Spanish, Brazilian shoes, all beautifully made and utmost quality leather, and just, they really were amazing. But even back then, back in the 90s, the majority of their shoes were like between $500 to $2,000. And, you know, way out of my reach. I didn't have money like that to throw away on a pair of shoes. And to be honest, even if I were exceedingly wealthy, I would still think it's actually a real extravagant waste to spend that much money on a pair of shoes or boots. I would still probably have to think twice and go, oh, really? Like, you're just paying for the name. You know, like when I fell in love with those Christian Louboutin studded stilettos. When was that? 2 years ago? You're just paying for the name, people of Earth, although they were exquisite. But they were $8,000. Imagine having $8,000 to just say, here, darling, buy yourself a pair of boots, and it's like nothing. It's like going to a normal shoe shop and paying maybe $200 to $500 now for a pair of shoes or boots. It's like, everything is relative, is it not? So I'm looking at these second-hand shoes in the second-hand shop thinking, I can't fucking believe they're charging nearly $300 for something that someone donated. And just, anyway, I walked out. I wasn't upset or anything. I just walked out and thought, the world's really inverted now, gone quite insane. But yes, as I was saying, I used to go, you know, back in the day, and I would go to Marion's and I would drool over their fabulous shoes, which were indeed fabulous. And then I'd look around at their sale items, and their sale items were usually 50% off, so they would still be in excess of a couple of $100 or sometimes $500, still out of my reach. But what they were doing, which was quite delightful, and I almost wonder why they did that actually. But thank you, Marion's. Because of you, I had the entire Jewish community roiling in envy every time I turned up in my exquisite shoes. What they would do was they had this bargain basement bin, and they would have shoes in there, and fortunately for me, because I have quite large feet, they were often of the larger sizes, because the more popular sizes like 7s and 8s would go quickly, and they'd be left with the clod-hopping hobbit shoes, am I right? Lucky Mama D. But the Holy One, Aye Asher Aye, has ways of looking after me in very strange and unusual ways. So I'd look at this, and it literally was just a big cardboard box, and they would have a sign on it, $50 a pair. Well, sometimes they were $100, but usually they were $50. And I'd go frolicking through it, and they had very snobby salespeople, but I actually think they can't, because they got to know me after a while, because I'd go there fairly regularly, and I'd pretend to look at all the expensive shoes, and then I'd shoot a grin at the salesperson, she'd smile and nod, and then I'd slink over like a naughty little kid to the big square box full of exquisite shoes for $50, and I'd go through and I'd be like squealing with delight, because sometimes they were shoes that I'd been looking at on the shelf for $1,000 and could not in a million years have afforded. And after a couple of years, they would turn up in the bargain bin, because, old fashioned or what have you. And I don't give a flying fuck about wearing the latest fashion. Some of the latest fashions are quite ugly, have been for about the last 20 years actually. So I thought, I don't mind wearing the previous fashion as long as it's a lovely pair of shoes in the right colour and the right style. So I still remember buying these exquisite, they were very pale shell salmon dusty pink leather, and on one side and the other side they were cream, and they were stilettos, and they were the most beautiful shoes. And I wore them. I actually wore them when I started work. I was wearing them to work. They were too good to wear to work. I was wearing them on the day that I fell out of the Academy, Queensland Police Academy bus, fell forwards and saw that I was about to crack my skull on a curb, and pulled myself, I don't know how I did it, lifted myself up and turned myself 180 degrees and landed, crunched back down on those exquisite shoes. They were so well made, those shoes, I didn't even twist my ankle. I mean, my ankle hurt a little bit, but I didn't do any actual injury to myself. And I knew then that day, because I should have died that day, I was heading to smash my head on the curb. And as I fell, all I could think was, my God, who's going to look after my children? Which is what I thought on the previous occasion when I had a near death, when I was actually being strangled. My last thought before almost losing consciousness was, who's going to protect my children? So anyway, I had this thought, and something or someone or my own, I don't know how I defied gravity, people of Earth, lifted me up and spun me around, put me back on my feet. And they were those very same shoes that I bought in Marion's for $50. I had bought them, 6 or 7 years prior, and obviously I hadn't worn them too often because they were still going strong at that point in time. 2000, 8th of March 2000, which much later I discovered with great shock was actually the date of my grandmother Eva Meyer's suicide. So maybe she was the angel who lifted me up and spun me around to keep me alive long enough to see my children grow to adulthood. It's beyond bizarre. But anyway, those pale pink and cream shoes, every time I wore them, I'd arrive in the school car park, and a bevy of other women would come, from my Jewish community, because, as I said, it was a Jewish day school. They would come running up to me. "Where did you get those shoes, Tanya? They're fabulous." And they really were quite fabulous. And I just look at them, because I never lie. I have no interest in lying, nor do I big note myself, nor do I believe in elitist, snobbish behaviours. I find it abhorrent, actually, and crass and debasing. Part of that is because I grew up with elitists and narcissists and snobs. So I would truthfully, quite sweetly say to them, "Oh, I bought them in Marion's." And then these women, 3 or 4 of them, would all go, "How did you afford that?" Looking at me as if I was on the game or something, And I would say, "How do you think I afforded it?" I said, "I paid real money, cash. Cash up, no tick," I used to joke about. And they'd look at me. "But you're poor. Everyone knows you're poor." I'd turn up in my little Mazda 121 hatchback, and they were all driving. What were they driving back in the day? Oh yes, Saabs and Audis and the latest Mercedes and Volvos. And what do I care? As long as my car works, turns on when I turn it on, and drives to where I want to go and comes back in one piece, I don't give a fuck what clonking bit of metal has a brand name on it. It's, again, the most stupid thing. I mean, of course, if I were wealthy, I'd probably buy a luxury car because I can afford it, and why not? But this, I'm driving the latest Saab, and oh yes, and I have a Lexus. I think that's why I'm a bit depressed today, actually. Because after I had my debrief, I went and got fish and chips at a fish and chip shop that was run by mostly Asian people, and so many people pulled up in front of their shop. They were all Asian, must have been family and friends coming for meals, and they pulled up in Lexuses and Audis, and then another customer who was African, she turned up in a very nice brand new VW, and I'm just sitting there eating my meal thinking, this is a reminder of the shoe experience, buying shoes in Marion's, and all the people in my community being jealous of me with these exquisite shoes, driving all these luxury cars, and yet jealous of little old me. Like, resentful that the poor Jew in the community might actually somehow level up and get something nice. It was really that level of kind of condescension. It really was. So anyway, so I say to them, "I bought it in Marion's." "How did you ever afford that?" I save up and I buy them. "But those shoes are in there at over $1,000. I said, "Yes, they are." Then they'd look at me again and I'd say, "Don't be stupid. Why would I pay full price for something when I can barely afford to eat?" I said, "I buy it on sale." And then they looked at me funny again, because they all knew that even their sales were half price, was still well over $500 or $1,000 depending on the shoe. And they sort of really looked confused, and I said, Why don't you, I said, take yourselves off to Marion's at Stone's Corner and have a look for yourself, and then you'll understand how it is I afford these shoes. They looked at me again, said, these exquisite Spanish shoes. Oh, yes, oh, they are indeed exquisite. Oh, are they from Spain? Oh, my goodness. I said, cost me $50. What? And they'd all fluff about and they'd all look suitably shocked like electrocuted birds. If they had feathers, they'd be sticking all out in all directions. Anyway, one of them, who was wealthier than I, but not exceedingly wealthy, she came back to me a few weeks later. Thank you for telling me how you bought your shoes, Tanya. I bought myself a lovely pair of shoes too. And then she went, for $50. I said, you see how wonderful it is when you are not a snob and not too proud and not too arrogant and are wise about how you spend your money? You saved yourself $950 for school fees or something eminently more boring. She looked at me, we high-fived, and we laughed and laughed and laughed. But, you know, the other women could easily afford the full price that Marion's were charging back in the day. In fact, they probably can easily afford it even now. They could probably afford to buy Marion's entire store out a dozen times over. But what does it actually matter at the end of the day? Shoes are shoes. I once was utterly humiliated at a Jewish Board of Deputies meeting in 2020. Actually, the anniversary was yesterday. 6 years ago I went to that meeting and to contribute to, wanting the Holocaust Museum to be started up here in Brisbane. And one of the men there was mocking and deriding me about my shoes then. They were lovely shoes, absolutely lovely shoes. I paid $4 for them in a second-hand shop, but I wasn't going to tell him that, the elitist fucking pig snob. So he's, look at those shoes, and mocking and deriding me. You know what I did? I put both my feet out, and I just did a little wiggle with them like this, and just looked at him. The pig. $4 shoes was enough to send a man into paroxysms of envy, and although he's married, supposedly respectably, ill-disguised lust. Do you want to see the shoes while we're on this subject? Let's go, babies. I've still got them to this day. And as you can see, they really could do with a bit of they're suede, so they're probably fucked now. But they were the London Rebels, which, fairly expensive to buy new. And look how high they are. I can't really wear them anymore. I wore them the last time to the Brooklyn Standard, and my former friend Scott said, time you wore flatter shoes, Tanya. He did anything to subversively try and turn me into a retired little old lady of decrepitation, because again, envy. But I it was awful how I was treated, actually, but I was in denial because I thought he was lovely. I genuinely loved him. Anyway, it doesn't matter now, but as you can see, they lace up in front, and I looked lovely when I wore them. Anyway, I was wearing those 6 years ago when I went to that meeting, and that filthy man, filthy, putrid man, was spent the whole time putting me down. You don't put the mama T down. She's been through enough shit since early childhood. You don't dare ever put her down, because her wrath will be taken with her to her very grave. And these shoes, my darlings, if I were ever to get a Jewish burial, I might make a note. You can bury her in the $4 fucking shoes, motherfuckers. So anyway, I mean, you have to laugh, don't you? Can you imagine people being envious of a woman because of her $4 second-hand shoes? Even I wouldn't have bought the $295 shoes yesterday because it's an outrage. Also, I can't wear them anymore. Have to resign to decrepitation. But I don't have to be decrepit, people of Earth. Don't have to be decrepit or bow down or scrape and bow to any nasty, malevolent, envious men, women or child. It was a bit of a theme though about feet and shoe wear and disparity between rich and poor yesterday, because after I had my very late lunch or early dinner at 4:30 in the afternoon after my debrief, sitting there at New Farm Park, I went over to the park because I didn't want to. By the time I ate, it was 5 p.m. peak hour traffic, and I didn't want to drive in peak hour through the city, especially Brunswick Street, trying to get onto the bridge, the Story Bridge. It's my anxiety was already through the roof, through the Richter scale. So I thought, no, I'll sit at the park and I'll digest my dinner. I actually had hiccups because it was too rich for me, too much oil. I really enjoyed it, but I was like struggling. I ordered battered cod and bear battered chips, and I actually struggled to get through the chips, which is unusual because I love chips. So anyway, I had the hiccups, and I bought another ginger beer to try and quell the hiccups, which worked. And I was sitting at the park, and there was a woman. Oh, I made a dreadful faux pas. Because she looked like late 40s, early 50s. And so she had this little child with her, little girl who looked about 3. And the little girl had this bandaging all across an arm, which I thought it was some kind of cast for a broken arm. And then she had these little white little shoes with lots of straps, and she had a strange gait, and she was sort of this little trip-trot gait, a very funny gait, and very odd it was. I was trying to work it out, but I just observed from my seat. It didn't engage. It's not my monkey, not my circus, it's not my business, and I just wanted to sit quietly. And anyway, this woman was with this little child, getting her to kick a soccer ball, practice kicking the ball, and I could see she was doing it to strengthen her legs. So, but I didn't realise that the bandaging was also to stretch out the musculature. So anyway, so we're sitting there, and I'm sitting there, and they were walking around. They weren't really making eye contact with me. And the little one got very enamoured of a group of 3 very pretty young Asian women who were sitting, having a little picnic and giggling and laughing together and full of joy. So naturally, being a toddler, she was drawn to their joy. and she kept wanting to go over and play with them, and the woman was indulging her but trying to extricate her. Actually, she'd go, I want to see the ladies, I want to see the ladies. The ladies were getting a bit annoyed because they were just happy in their own little space, and I'm watching all this going down too. And then another woman came along with the most beautiful dog. It was a corgi looking dog, but it had very long fur. It was a beautiful dog. And I heard her say his name was Banjo, which was sweet. And Banjo chased the soccer ball with such joy and relish, and was pushing the ball along with his nose, dribbling it like a experienced soccer player, but with his nose, and had that ball under his full control. And even I was impressed watching how that dog loved that ball. It was beautiful to watch. So I'm sitting there thinking, once again, I'm more enamoured and identifying with the animals than with the humans. Typical Tanya. Well, after the abuse I've experienced throughout my life, you can't exactly blame me, can you? So anyway, but I'm loving this beautiful dog, and the woman, the owner of the dog, didn't even really look at me. It was almost like I was invisible sitting there, and I thought, oh, well, I don't care, don't really, not bothered one way or the other. And she eventually took the dog and moved to the farther side of the park, further away from us, but kind of stood and watched me from the distance, which was odd. I thought, if you're that bloody curious, you could have said hello to me when you were standing with the other woman and child with your dog. So, oh well, people are weird, and people think I'm weird, and never the twain shall meet, am I right? Except those beautiful souls like you who come to my YouTube channel to watch me describe all these things, the breakdown of Western civilization, the devolution of the human spirit. It really is astonishing and terrifying for me. It really is. It's utterly chilling. But I'm just sitting there sanguinely sipping on my ginger beer and chilling out, because I thought, well, I'm going home soon, and waiting for, the worst of the traffic to be over. Anyway, after about half an hour or so, the woman with the child actually came, nodded to me and said hello. I said hello back, and I said to her, you're a wonderful grandmother. I've been watching you with your grandchild. She looked at me horrified. Oh, fuck, what have I done now? You see, everything I do, and no matter what I do, it's always wrong, because she didn't look young. She would have been in her late 40s, unless she looked older because she's tired or whatever. But anyway, she looked at me, she said, oh, she's not my grandchild, I'm her mother. I went, oh, okay, because I must have had her late in life, happens. My mother had me at 38. So I just nodded, and she said, yes, she said, I adopted her, we adopted her only 2 years ago, something like that. And I said, oh, how old is she? She said, and then the little one said, I'm nearly 3, which I thought was delightful. I went, oh, you're nearly 3. You're a big girl, And her adopted mother smiled proudly, and I said to her, oh, you've got a cast on your arm. I said, I broke my arm when I was a little girl too. And then the little girl looks at me very strangely, and the mother looks at me strangely, and I'm like, oh fuck, I've said something wrong again. And the mother says, it's not a cast, it's bandaging. We have to stretch her arm, stretch all the muscles out. And I went, oh, I said, I understand. I could see that you were strengthening her with the soccer ball. She said, yes, that's what that's for, getting her muscles stretched and strengthened. So I nodded. Anyway, she's a very pretty little girl, blonde, strawberry blonde, curly hair, big blue eyes, delicately trotting around with her ungainly little feet, poor little thing. It's a struggle. But I said to the mother again, I said, you're so patient and you're so good with her. I said, it sparks joy for me to watch you with her, actually. She said, oh, really? And I said, yes. I said, I've got 2 adult daughters, one's 40 and one's 38, but neither of them have had children, so I'm not a grandmother. And I said, it's just, I was enjoying seeing you interacting with your little one, and it's nice to see that, you know. And I said, I'm disappointed that I don't have grandchildren, but it is what it is. And she looked at me, and then very strangely she said to me, oh, where have you come from? It's kind of a strange question to ask. I said, oh, I've been to my doctor's appointment. I said, he moved recently, so it's my first time coming here. I said, but I'll be here probably once a month. And I'm not wanting to reveal too much. And then a bit later on again, she said something about, which doctor did you see? It was a bit odd, you know, quite a bit invasive actually. And I thought, oh, well, I've made the faux pas about assuming your child as your grandchild, and that the bandaging on her arm is a cast, and I was a bit confused about the colour of it, to be honest. But anyway, so I said, yes, I said, I come to see my psychiatrist. And then her whole face, she went pale, like I'd said I was some kind of serial killer or something. Her face went pale, and then she turned her head, and then I could see she was processing it like, I'm talking to a crazy person. And it's funny actually, because there's a private psychiatric clinic just down the road from the park too, very exclusive one. So she's probably assumed that I've come from there, which is not the case. So I just smiled and I said, yes, I said. And she said, oh, so why are you here? I mean, all this interrogation, why am I here? I'm here because I'm here. Fuck off. If I was in a bad mood, I would have said it like that. Not fuck off because the child's there, but I would have, you know, laid down the law. But I was in a mellow kind of a mood, and I was chilling out. So I said to her, oh, well, you know, I'm here because I go to see my psychiatrist. And I said, and the reason is I have very bad anxiety. I said, so after my appointment, I said, I came and I had a meal, and then I've come here to, you know, just chill out before I beat the traffic going home, because, you know, peak hour traffic. And then she looked at me and she said, oh yes, she said, Brunswick Street is terrible at peak hour. She said, you made the right decision, looking at me. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not crazy. I can actually process and work things out, lady. And I think that's when she realised that I'm not crazy, that she started talking to me again. It was really quite chilling though. And then a bit after that, she says to me, and what are you going to do now with the rest of your afternoon? What an odd thing to ask someone. Very odd. So I looked at her, and again I just said, oh, well, you know, you're going to go home and have your dinner, because she mentioned they had a chicken. They were going to have some chicken for dinner. And I said, and I'm going to go home now. I said, now that the traffic will have quelled a bit. And then she nodded. Anyway, what I did do, because I asked her about the rose gardens, because New Farm Park has the most exquisite roses there. So what I did do was I got in my car, said goodbye to her and the little girl, and I got in my car and I drove round to the entrance to New Farm Park, where the little roadway goes round in a circuit. And I drove around and I didn't get out of the car. I just felt othered and a bit invaded, to be honest. So I didn't get out and actually walk around the rose bushes, but I could see from my driver's window that they were in bloom, but from the distance a bit they didn't look actually anything all that exquisite. And I thought, well, it's towards the end of the year when they're tired and the blooms are not as spectacular. So I drove around the whole circuit. I went down past the river, down past where they have the I can't think of the name, place where you can have bands, you know. And then I exited, and then I was still a bit worried about the traffic being very heavy, because it's like by then it was 6 o'clock, and I thought, oh, it's still going to be quite heavy traffic. And actually it wasn't too bad, and my anxiety quelled, and I calmed down and drove home comfortably. And so actually, all in all, I had a lovely day, but it was such a strange encounter with that woman with her little girl going, what are you going to do for the rest of the afternoon? The way she asked questions made me think she must be a teacher or someone that's very nosy anyway. Oh, you have to laugh. Anyway, we're 46 minutes in, and I was going to start reading to Gerald Durrell, but I got on the subject of shoes, and you know, meeting the little girl with the difficulty walking, and shoes and feet. But yes, so today I felt a bit flattened out, but it's partly because you know, I debriefed with my psychiatrist about my daughter just ghosting me when I walked into her workplace, which is fine, it's her workplace, and I didn't go there with any intention actually to seek her out, because I know she doesn't want anything to do with me. I really went there purely to see the art gallery after 2.5 years. But we debriefed, my doctor, and he said you should leave her a note or a card and just say, I came to the art gallery and I saw you, and you know, it was nice to see you, I hope you're doing well, and just go about things that way. And I said to him, there's no point, Brian. He said, why? And I said, she'll just see it as invasive, and nothing I can do will ever be any good for her. She doesn't want me, and she's made that abundantly clear. And so if I leave a note or if I don't leave a note, whatever I do, it's the wrong thing. And I think that's why I feel a bit distraught today. Because I said to him I was okay, and then I kind of fell in a hole 3 days later, and then I pulled myself back up. But just thinking about it, you know, how rude people are, how awful they are. Like I was telling him about the man at the bistro there. My doctor was even amazed. He was like, that's just beyond awful. And I said, Brian, it's everywhere I go now. I'm treated like that. I said, at the beginning I thought, I get a bit, you know, paranoid, and because there's just been so much awfulness that I almost look for it, expect it. And I said, but it's everywhere I go. Even in a way, that woman at the park interrogating me like I was some kind of alien just arrived, like, where have you come from? How are you going to spend the afternoon now? What are your plans? Perhaps she'd considered inviting me home with her, but you don't invite strangers you just met in a park, do you? It was kind of thought perhaps that was what she was thinking. She could see that I was sitting there quite contentedly alone. Maybe she thought I was an object of pity or something. I have no idea. But, you know, I must say the people in the fish and chip shop at the New Farm Fish Cafe were very lovely people. I was standing there waiting, and the little girl, again a little girl about 12, 13, turned to me and looked me up and down. Parents were smiling indulgently. She said, "Hello, how are you?" And I said, "Hello, I've got the hiccups. How are you?" Because I really was. And it's because I gobbled down the food, I suppose. Then the little girl gave me a very strange look and just shrank into herself. But behind me was a queue of people, and they were all Asian people, and they were all connected, to the little girl and the mum, and waiting to order. So clearly they come after work, and they all dine together on a Friday afternoon, which is lovely, We used to do that in my business in Chicken Express. My friends from the Jewish community would come, Michelle Briner and her husband and their little boy and her brother and sister-in-law and their little children. Was it just the little boy? I can't remember. Yes, and their son, and no, they had 2 children, I think. Well, anyway, and their parents, and they would come and they would support our little business and dine in it with us, and I would go and sit with them, and it was very congenial, and in German we say gemütlich, very comfortable and inclusive and quite sweet. But that was, when we were both married to our then husbands, and then after that it all sort of drifted away and drifted apart, which is sad actually. It's sad how I was kind of treated for being the newly divorced poor one in the community. Then I had double jeopardy. Not only was I poor, but I was a very happy, free woman. Even Michelle's brother came to me one time and he said to me, "People in the community are so envious of you, Tanya Arons." What? I said. Envious of me? Yes, he said. I said, "But they're all driving Saabs and Volvos and Mercedes and, probably Lexuses these days." I said, "Why on earth would anyone be jealous of me with my trauma issues and my life experiences and my difficulties?" And then he looked at me, went a little bit pale because he realised it was kind of an odd thing to say. He looked at me and he said, "But Tanya, don't you understand?" "No," I said. "What?" "They're jealous of your level of freedom," and smiled sweetly. I said, "Freedom would be having $1 million and being able to buy what I want and live comfortably without constant chronic anxiety and fear." He nodded. "And yet," he said, "you're probably the wealthiest person amongst all of us because no one owns you and you don't own anything and you're free." I thought it was just some moment of madness on his part, not that he was mad, but it was just a very strange thing to say. He was a very spiritual man, very kind man to me. On the few occasions that we ran into each other at functions or meetings or what have you, he was always very gentlemanly and kind. So you can imagine my absolute astonishment when I learned recently, only a couple of months or so back, that he's divorced from his wife now. My goodness, could have knocked me down with a feather. So, 30 years ago, he was hinting that he too was jealous of my freedom. The last time I spoke to him, I was a bit cheeky to him actually. I said, "How's the first million going?" And he smiled sweetly and he said, "Oh, Tanya, there's way more than just 1 million now." And I just threw my head back and laughed, because I don't measure people by how much money they have. I really don't. It's part of my madness. I probably should. I should have been a gold digger like they all thought I was. I should have been a whore of Babylon. Maybe by then I would have been able to afford $295 second-hand shoes, or those $8,000 Christian Louboutin boots. But, you know, one thing I learnt from my evil, life-threatening, truly life-threatening separation and divorce was money means nothing if you're miserable. Absolutely nothing. It's like eating dirt every single day of your life. So here I sit inside because it's too hot to enjoy the garden. Not eating dirt, but not partaking of gold either. Ah well. Anyway, on that note, bye for now. Have a beautiful day wherever you are in the space-time continuum. And I want to say it again because it came to me this morning. My psychiatrist, Brian, saved my life, and he saved it by allowing me to taper off all my meds almost 10 years ago, have my mind back. Having my mind back, it's been a long, hard, arduous rebuilding, and there were a lot of awful things that happened after, June 2016 that set me back again, knocked me off my feet again. A lot of awful, awful things. The most awful of all being the COVID epoch from 2020 on. But I got my mind back just in the nick of time to save myself. And to you, Brian. I don't think he watches my videos. He doesn't have time. He's a hard-working psychiatrist, but it's out there, and I tell him to his face. He's a wonderful man, and he's stood by me through thick and through thin. And I've been in therapy with him now 15 years and 4 months. It's a long time, and he's worked hard to keep me reasonably in equilibrium, and I've worked hard too. It's been a good therapeutic alliance and a good working relationship. And he's one of the few men on this planet that actually fought for me and demonstrated his loyalty and wants the best for me. It's just a great tragedy that I never found a human man to have a sexual partnership with that could provide me that same level of unconditional love. On that note, bye for now from Sacred Space at Titania's Realm.